Hi everyone, Lisa and Dan here from Fireside Strategic. We're on a mission to grow human-centric businesses. In the Fireside Chat series, we're celebrating inspiring leaders who care both about the strategic and human side of building great organizations. Right now, we are very excited to be chatting with Leili McKinley, founder of the Identitype Group. She has built and sold 2 businesses, and this is her 3rd. Leili, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So would you mind telling our audience a little bit more about who you are?
Sure. So I am a goofball who's also a CEO. I'm a 3rd-time CEO. So I built and sold 2 businesses. And as I was just telling Lisa, I basically started my first business because I was fired from every job I had because I'm a goofball. And also because I made a terrible waitress. I made an even worse person in retail. I would spend either too much time on the floor chatting with customers, which my managers would get mad at me about, or, I would spend too much time chatting with people I was serving and then mix up the food. I mean, I was terrible. So, that's not even to bring up the whole entire tray of drinks. That was like a pile. I mean, I kid you not, it was like for a table of 15, and I'm carrying this tray of drinks on heels. And don't you know, the whole thing just goes down, kaboom, all over the entire table. And I just walked back and my manager was like, you.
I'm so glad that I met you as a CEO and not as a waitress.
I think everybody is. So really, but I think the thing is, what are you going to do with failure? And that, when we start talking about strategy and human-centric businesses, I think the first thing that we have to tackle is failure. Can you own it? Can you turn it into something that actually helps you? Those are the moments where you have an opportunity for growth. And a lot of people miss it. And CEOs in particular miss it. And that has to do with the fact that we are taught that leadership means invulnerable. Except vulnerability is your best avenue to growth. And when you do not feel like you have the option to own failures or mistakes or catastrophic failure in certain cases, you're so uncomfortable with your own process, your own journey of being a better human, that you actually, you stagnate. And people, they're really quick to pick up inauthenticity. They're really quick to pick up when you're trying to blame other people, or when you're just stagnant or stuck or in denial. And that's when leadership really starts to tank. And you see a lot of that right now. Just turn on the news. Or, it's happening for a lot of CEOs when they're having trouble pivoting, they're having trouble with, real live, person to person or team failures that are happening, and they just don't really know how to address it other than trying to improve process. But improving process without supporting people, you are not going to get results. So, and the reason that I know this is because, I tried it before in my own business and it doesn't work. And that's part of how I came to the Identitype system, was really trying to understand people on a deeper level, trying to understand how to get teams to work better together and how to elevate everyone so that they felt like their own leader. And so that it wasn't just a hierarchical sense of leadership, but it was an inner sense of leadership so that people could move forward with their own talents, their own skills. I didn't want people to fit into a mold. I don't want a cookie cutter. because the best teams are put together from diverse thought, from diverse backgrounds, from people willing and able to challenge each other because there's a sense of psychological safety. So this is my very long-winded way of coming around and saying, hi, I'm Leili McKinley, and I do all things relational capital, so that I focus on the relational fabric between people, and that's what my system builds.
So much awesomeness to dig into there, Leili. Want to start, we had an interesting conversation with a client recently in which we were reflecting on the way that he introduces himself in the world. And in a typical business context, when CEOs introduce themselves, they'll never talk about failure, right? That introduction, that classic moment where you're telling someone how you want them to see you, we never talk about failure. We try to make ourselves into this invulnerable, perfect human. And so, and we were talking to him and saying, talk about some failures when you introduce yourself, right? Bring those up right away. And how much more authentic can you get, right?
Absolutely.
Curious to learn a little bit more about the Identitype system. So you've told us in general sort of some of the philosophy behind it, but concretely, what is it and how does it work?
Concretely, it is an assessment of 12 different styles of leadership that we all embody. So we embody all 12. It's just that there are certain ones that we lean into, kind of like our superpowers. They're the parts that come naturally. And then there are what I call learned gifts, which is a counterintuitive superpower spot because we actually help each other and can teach each other from the place that we've struggled, the place that we fail the most. I'll put it to you this way. So you don't go to someone for whom something is effortless in order to teach you. And I always use, sort of AA for addicts, okay? You don't go ask somebody who's been sober all their life how to beat addiction. They have no idea. They don't understand the pain. They don't understand the process. They don't understand the failure. They don't understand that struggle. So going to somebody for whom something is effortless to teach you or impart wisdom about the struggle and support you in it isn't going to help you. So I call those our learned gifts. So I basically assess people in terms of their own leadership from where they can lean in and be effortless, and then where their learned gifts are, so that I can really help them be the best leader they can be. And then we do it across teams in order to help balance out teams and really show people this is a great place for you to teach others from, and this is a great place for you to take on projects from.
I love that. I love the self-awareness that this imparts on the people within the organization. I'm very curious. So once people have done the assessment and they understand much more deeply the way that they function and the way others on their team function, how do they use this knowledge? What's the best way that you could take this and implement it? Or if you could tell us a couple of examples to really bring it to life, that could be really interesting.
Sure. We've used this across teams, for instance, in manufacturing, in engineering, in science. And what happens is that people start to understand their own leadership journey. So it's different than assessments. For instance, I get a lot of people who are like, well, is it really sort of understanding your role, sort of the right butt in the right seat? No. This isn't really about getting the job. This is more about once someone has one, what their leadership, what their personal leadership has to offer in terms of building the relational fabric in a company. So someone comes in and they, for instance, they're really a very nurturing person. That is a skill. Okay, not everybody comes to nurturing naturally. Okay, so that may be something that's effortless for them that they can contribute not just to the people around them in their team, but they can also focus on in terms of their role and how they want to inhabit their role. Okay, now maybe you get somebody else who is what we call a rebuilder. They are the person who can take on a process and really figure out very quickly and very effortlessly what to keep and what to throw away. Because there are a lot of people who really struggle with taking out the trash, whether or not it's their own personal trash or even looking inside of a current process in a company and getting rid of things that are obsolete or perhaps reconfiguring them so that it's better. There are a lot of people who just, that's not their strength. They really don't want to touch something. They just want you to tell them how to do it and when to do it so that they can just kind of plug into that. There are other people for whom that's never enough and they love to tinker with it. So it's really looking at, once you get somebody who's like a nurturer and a rebuilder on a team, who's the visionary? Where's the person who's going to come in and sort of paint the picture for where you want to take those pieces and people and put them forward in order to support a better process for a better product and, you know, move the results forward. So that's how we use it. We sort of put everything together kind of like a puzzle, but we look at it from a very holistic perspective because we also recognize that just because that one person has that nurturing superpower doesn't mean that there aren't other people with the same capacity. And just, you know, who do you want to be? And we really offer people support in terms of learning more about themselves and their own, you know, developing their own awareness around that. So that what we say is we come in with helping the behavioral initiatives match the strategic initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Again, so much awesomeness to dig into. Curious how the assessment distinguishes between a gift that's learned versus a gift that comes naturally. How are you able to unpack which of those is the case for someone?
1,244 data points.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's essentially what we're operating on. The assessments are pretty deep dive. But we've whittled it down to where somebody can do it in about 20 minutes. It's just, there's a lot of process in the background. And, you know, it's very data driven. And it allows us to take a really good holistic picture of, you know, where people have struggled. And so far, you know, we've put through somewhere around 2,000 people through this. And everyone's pretty much come back and said, "Ooh, yeah, okay, you nailed it." You know, which I think is a good thing. You know, sometimes it's an uncomfortable conversation, but that's that thing that you were talking about where, you know, you have to sometimes lead in with what you're not good at. One of the things that I have found is that it's actually quite freeing for a lot of people, because when they get to own their struggle and they get to say, you know what, I'm not good at that, and I don't have to pretend to be, because you've now made a space for all of us to feel safe around what we are good at and what we're not good at. And that allows people to own, you know, the space where they struggle and then ask for help. Because a lot of people have been trained, again, with that whole leadership mindset. You don't ask for help. You know, one huge mistake CEOs make: don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. Well, you have just left all of the thought and discussion and really juicy innovation off the table, because you just made somebody else responsible in a silo for being the innovator. Except the problem is you need so much more around you, and in terms of input and conversation and, you know, discussion and maybe even dispute. You need all of that in order to really get to sort of what the best innovation is. So when you say that you don't want to be a part of that discussion, or you just want answers, people typically feel backed into a corner.
That is such a brilliant and important insight. I know I've definitely made that mistake before of asking people that work for me to come with solutions. And now I'm sitting here really thinking through, wow, what a mistake that was. So thank you. I think a lot of our audience will really appreciate that insight. You are very wise, and I'm so impressed. And I can't help but be so curious. What is your personal journey that led to you founding this system? What were the companies you were the CEO of? Like, you describe yourself as a goofball. Nobody in our interviews has ever described themselves as a goofball, other than perhaps me. So I'm just really curious, what led to this?
Well, I'm just going back to the goofball comment. I think, a huge part of what keeps me sane, in Corona hell, whatever it is that we're in, is my sense of humor. I have a very, animated sense of humor. And at least I'm a legend in my own living room. Like, in my head, I'm hilarious. Okay. So, I don't always include other people like in that inner dialogue, but it's definitely there going on all the time. So I think, that's just the part of me that engages other people. And how I came to this system is, a lot of trying to figure out so I built and sold two companies. They were both in the home furnishings industry. I have a design background. So I went to Parsons, and, part of what I was doing in building those first companies was really trying to figure out what branding is, how to build a better brand. What the heck is a brand? Well, some years ago, branding was really thought of as just an external thing that was part of marketing. And it's what the companies on 7th Avenue used to do, is they drove ad campaigns. And it was sort of like, well, we're just going to make a brand. Well, as things have shifted over time and consumers really started to take control of brands, with the advent of social media and all of the different ways that you can engage now, the narrative changed. And so I was, kind of at that turning point of where the narrative started changing. I went through, my second business was through the .com boom and bust. And I really watched as the crucible of branding, what it is, what it meant to be, where we were really struggling having these conversations with both our market and our employees at the same time, and what those stories were coming together to be, and how they would either inspire or completely crush people around you. And I watched as people were inspired by companies and then also crushed by them when they felt let down or disappointed by actions, or where actions didn't meet, expectations. So as I was putting these things together and developing these, I realized that the value was really in the story that you built, and that story really came from people, And one of the things that always stuck with me was this image. I thought to myself, what if we, what would a business look like without the people? Nothing. You just have a building. You'd open the doors and there would be my warehouse sitting there with a whole lot of product, but nothing would be moving. So really the brand is the people. It's the people who work with me. It's the people who buy from me. It's me. And then how do those stories, how does everybody engage on a humanistic level in terms of the story? Because that really became the strategy for me. It's like building that relational capital, because, have you ever heard the term emotional bank?
No, I have not.
No? Okay. So I use this term a lot. We build emotional bank in relationships so that we can take out deposits when we make mistakes, because we've got credit in the bank. It's like, oh man, I screwed up on you. I let you down. I didn't live up to the expectations. I wasn't a woman of my word. Whatever it is that I did, I need to take out a little deposit out of that emotional bank that we've built up because I need you to forgive me. And so when you are, I started to realize that I needed to build this emotional bank with everybody, whether it was in the market or whether or not it was in my company, in order to be able to have emotional currency, a currency system. And that's where I got into really understanding that we're investing in each other, and the system needed to reflect that. So I started out really looking at this as an external brand, like how can I use these stories to communicate with the market, and all of a sudden it flipped on its head, and I went, the market will be fine if I have the internal market taken care of. If I have the brand cohesive inside, if the vision, the mission, the core values, and the brand promise are all delivering, understood, engaged, and embodied on the inside of my company, that will flow outward, because it does automatically, because we as people tell each other stories all the time. But if I don't have that embodied and in process and engaged inside my company internally, nothing is gonna match up, and the expectations are gonna be off, and basically your market's gonna be like, you're inauthentic, we're out of here. So I started looking at a lot of what I'd learned in terms of art and the artistic process and telling stories, and I took a deep dive into semiotics, which I had gone through with an amazing teacher when I was in college, and had studied semiotics and went through that and started looking at the power of symbols, and then started looking at Jungian psychology, and then started looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and on and on and on and on and on. And that's how I started to pull all of this together to create the system and assess people so that I could assess teams.
A big thing that comes up for me, just as I hear all these different fields that you're uniting, is how interdisciplinary you are, right? How you have a mind that jumps from one subject to the next, right? It's divergent thinking. It's a very rare kind of creativity, but if it comes from a CEO, that CEO can now see into the future so much more effectively because you have your hand in so many different disciplines, right?
Yeah, I intellectual rabbit holes and I have a really facile relationship. Yeah. And I get lost sometimes. But yes, I mean, I pull lots of different systems together. I mean, I look at, something I would call emotional physics and emotional math, which is a project that I'm actually working on with a couple of quantitative math people, which is really about the equations of emotions and what they result in some way. It's sort of a bit of a predictive emotion map.
I'm curious, so, COVID-19 has been a really crazy time, and what has changed in your world during these last few months?
Oh, what hasn't changed?
Good point.
What hasn't changed? I think what has, I think the only thing that hasn't changed is my sense of tenacity and really wanting to see projects through. I do an enormous amount of self-care, and I advocate for self-care because burnout is a real problem. And, I think the one thing that probably has changed is that I've been even more attentive to that. And as CEOs, you have to self-care, and you have to make sure that people understand that this is not about being selfish. And I don't mean like doing it from a selfish perspective. I mean self-care, understanding that the core of taking care of yourself is being able to refill your well so that other people can draw water from it when they need it. And that if you are wiped out and exhausted, I guarantee you the people around you who are depending upon you for inspiration and motivation are going to be wiped out and exhausted. So model self-care and model more of it than less of it. And understand that the people who are depending upon you as a CEO need to hear from you. They need your permission, because we have such a crazy expectation in terms of work culture. And there's so many remote teams right now, and people are like, I'm still home, and their life or family circumstances may not be the same as the next person. So they're sending emails at 11 p.m. at night and expecting responses. And that's, you really need to respect boundaries. You really need to respect other people's, give them time for self-care. That's, I think, one thing that's really changed. And, that may be a nurturing model of leadership that you're not quite comfortable with. And it's something that, when I find those kinds of imbalances, those are things that I coach to.
It's a huge, huge theme, even more so during COVID. One of the big things for our company is that we have a philosophy that we slow down to speed up. Exactly. And I think our relationship with time, especially when we feel the pressure of a pandemic, oh man, is our business going to survive in the middle of a pandemic? Then there's an instinctual response to allocate more time to the business, right? Every minute that I'm not working on the business is a minute ill spent, is a philosophy a lot of people have. How would you respond to that philosophy?
You cannot be creative and innovative when the well is dry. You can't. You don't have it. So there are a couple of things that, I teach. So for one of my clients, I did a presentation on physiological peak times of productivity, which was really about listening to what works for you and, finding time to celebrate your wins, finding time to just listen to other people and allow, humor, allow doing things that seem like utter nonsense, like playing games. Getting together to do things that are not work-based, because part of what has to happen is the brain, and, in terms of what they've studied in neuroscience, the brain needs downtime, but it also needs divergent thinking in order to be able to access and synthesize what you already know, to be able to put it to more creative use in places that you don't know. So if you're working all the time on the same things and you're not giving yourself any downtime, I guarantee you, for a lot of people, that winds up eating into sleep. Bad idea. Bad idea. Sleep deprivation causes all kinds of harm. Just ask the partner who's still trying to put up with you. So, really getting into creative mindsets that solve problems or get results. Really, you have to get into, allowing downtime. So, that's a big piece of it. Working 24/7 does not actually help you. They found that you're far less productive.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with all of that. So as we start to move towards the end of our time together, Leili, a question that we'd love to ask all of our guests, and I think this is a perfect one for you, is beyond work, what's fun for you? It's so important, especially in challenging moments like these, to find ways to have fun. So what's fun for Leili outside of work?
Playing with my daughter. And I also volunteer a lot for causes around animal welfare. And so that kind of stuff, like organizing fundraising drives, that kind of stuff, that's all fun for me. As well as just, what else? I play a lot of board games.
That's awesome. I want to come and hang out with you. You sound like a really cool person.
You can come and play. We play a lot of checkers. But my 8-year-old makes up the rules, so it's really fun.
So you have to be very flexible. It's like the ultimate test in going with the flow. It's a test of your mindfulness. I love it.
It is.
Well, look, Leili, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing your really deep, thoughtful, insightful experience and a lot of your humor. We think you're great. And
Thank you.
thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is a genuine pleasure. It's so enjoyable to be able to talk to people of like minds. It is actually creates a sense of hope for me in a lot of ways, because I really am hoping that business is starting to move away from, revenue focused solely on results and more towards, a human-centric perspective of the fact that this really is an outgrowth of human activity. And so, business, just for the sake of business, it should never be an excuse anymore to harm someone else or something else. It's not okay. And that we really need to embrace each other because, we got one planet, we're all in this boat together, and, we have to take care of each other.
We're on the same boat.